Thank you for joining. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining Sunrise County Economic Council for our discussion surrounding community-driven broadband. I am Elaine Abbott, Community and Economic Development Planner with Sunrise County Economic Council, and I'm joined by my colleague, Crystal Hitchings, who you know of with her previous work with the Washington County Council of Governments and her current work with Down East Acadia Regional Tourism. So, just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. This discussion is being recorded and it will be posted on the Sunrise County Economic Council website for future use. Tuesday's meeting was also recorded and will also be posted. All questions will be held for the last 30 minutes of our program, but you may feel free at any time to post questions in the chat, or you can wait to the end, the last 30 minutes, and ask your questions live. But please mute yourselves so everyone may have the best audio experience. First, we will hear from Dan Sullivan, President of Down East Broadband Utility, and Chris Laughlin, Baileyville Town Manager, along with Mike Ellis, Calais City Manager. Mike is unable to attend this evening, but they formed a cooperative municipally owned broadband utility. Following that will be an entirely different approach to municipally owned broadband, which will be presented by Roque Bluffs resident and former 19-year select person Lisa Hanscom, and Nate Brimmer, Vice President of Operations with Axiom Technologies. So again, I thank you for joining Sunrise County Economic Council for this very timely discussion. And Dan, I'm going to let you take it away.
All right, thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. As mentioned, I'm the president of the Down East Broadband Utility, with the first municipal broadband utility in the state of Maine, first and only. There are a couple other groups that are attempting to do the same thing, which is wonderful news. Mid-Coast region, I think, has got a bunch of 10 to 12 towns that are trying to do what DBU has done. So I'm going to give a brief overview of what DBU is and leave some time for questions, I think, to drill in a little bit deeper as we talked about earlier. But basically, it's the network is what's referred to as an open access dark fiber network, which is a mouthful, I realize, but that's basically what that means, is that the towns have built fiber infrastructure throughout Calais and Baileyville, and we're now working on Alexander, Indian Township, and Cooper and Princeton, hopefully soon. But in the towns of Calais and Baileyville, we've put about 99% of the towns have been completed. We've got two small sections, one in Baileyville and one in Calais, that still have to be done. The one in Baileyville is proceeding. We think that'll be done very soon, and Calais should follow right behind it. So we'll be able to say that 100% of the people who want to be on the Down East Broadband Network will have access to it. In the beginning, we attempted to work with the providers, the Consolidated, what was Fairpoint at that time, but in Spectrum, asking if we could help them finance building a fiber to the home network in our area, because their common complaint, which you hear from all the big ISPs, is that we're too rural, too few people. You know, it's just not economically feasible. And we get that. I'm a small businessman. I understand you have to make a profit. And so we said, well, perhaps we can offset some of those costs and make it more profitable for you to come in here. And they turned us down. They wanted nothing to do with working in a collaborative network. So we went and built the network ourselves. We did a feasibility study to see if it would work. We did a lot of town meetings. We had meetings with Chamber of Commerce's, the Lions clubs. We had billboards or signs put up all over town. We met with the town councils, and it became very apparent that the take rate would not be a problem, because people were very frustrated with what was being offered and the cost of what was being offered. So in a nutshell, once the network was up and running, it's open access. So we would allow multiple internet service providers to sell their service in our network. We have one at the moment. We're negotiating with two others. So we're hoping to bring on at least one more, if not two, to provide service. As of now, Pioneer Broadband is the ISP on the network. They provide a 100 by 100 connection, symmetrical connection, which is only available through fiber for $59 a month. You can get all the way up to a gig, and that'll get even faster than that if customers really want it. We built what is referred to as a home run network. There's different ways to build these fiber networks. Some use splitters because the fiber signal technology has not been able to outrace it yet. We haven't figured out how much data we can pump down a fiber line. We haven't maximized it, which is one of the reasons it's what they call a future-proof technology. It's not like DSL or cable or fixed wireless or satellite that have limitations. They have capacity limitations. They have latency issues. They're not symmetrical. They can't do the same uploads and downloads. So we decided not to build a splitter network, but to do what's called home run, which is a dedicated piece of fiber that goes to every single person who wants to have it. So what that does for us is basically leave a wide open lane for as technology changes. And as some of you here know, I'm a huge advocate of municipal broadband, and especially when it comes to where public dollars are spent. But in the case of our network, when the technology changes, because we know it's going to change, it changes on almost every week, it gets faster and better and can push more data down. In our particular case, all the ISP has to do is go into one of our co-location cabinets and change the lasers out. You don't go back up on the poles. You don't have to go restring wires. You don't have to put boosters in, any of that kind of stuff. You go into the cabinet and you upgrade the technology. That's not the same with Elon Musk's satellites that went up. When they no longer can provide the signal, you got to either go up and get those satellites out of there, or you got to send more satellites up with new equipment. Same with cell towers. Every cell tower in the country eventually gets to a fiber network somewhere. And if this fiber were as ubiquitous as it is in Calais and Baileyville, just going off on a side moment here for a second, our cell service systems would be we'd have far more coverage. Because if you had fiber on every telephone pole in the state of Maine, you would then could have a small little antenna on that pole that could be then transmitting the cell data. So that's another piece to this, but that's the ubiquity of fiber is just really, really important. So in Calais and Baileyville, like I mentioned at the beginning here, we've had a lot of interest from other towns all across Maine. I've had meetings with people as far away as Texas that are trying to figure out how they could replicate, what the citizens of Calais and Baileyville and Alexander and Indian Township have done. It's been, we've been successful. We're at about 50% of the take rate that we want in order to make us, as viable as possible. Chris can weigh in on some of the stuff on the Baileyville side when I break off here in a second. I would like to bring up, you had those slides there, Crystal. I just wanted to give just a general overview to people of what broadband or fiber broadband really is. There's a lot of confusion around it. And this is very short. This won't take very long. If you go to the next slide, Crystal. About 13 years ago, about 10 years ago, the United States was 13th in broadband availability and cost and speed in the world. 10 years later, we're still 13th. We invented the internet, and we have some of the most dismal broadband on the planet, which makes no sense to me. But now, next slide. Here's an example of why that's taking place. This is an ad from AT&T. I looked at this the other day. I was just doing something, and this popped up. And they're talking about their 5G networks and how this is going to be, the greatest thing since sliced bread. And I don't know if you can read this all, but you look down below the word everyone. It says AT&T may temporarily slow data speeds if the network is busy. That's because they're not using full fiber networks all the way through the whole system. They're going to have latency. They're going to have overcrowding. They look at broadband like hotels look at renting hotels. I ran a hotel back in the 70s and was told by management that always overbook because not everybody shows up. And the ISPs do the same thing. They overbook, but unfortunately with the internet, everybody's showing up. So they need to realize these networks are needed and people want to be on them. So give me the next one there, Crystal. This is an example that should drive us all crazy. If you're not aware of it, those orange little stripes there indicate a fiber connection. So when you look at a telephone pole outside your house or in Main Street in the town you happen to live in, if you see a little orange strip, sometimes they're red. You'll notice Down East Broadband Utility at the very bottom, we're blue. We decided to be a little different. But the point of this slide is that those top three, the one all the way up at the top is most likely Spectrum, The one in the middle is most likely consolidated, and the one on the bottom is 3-ring binder. Fiber has been in existence in Maine and across this nation for years, for decades. So the ability to be able to give the connections that Calais and Baileyville have has always been there. Just the ISPs have chosen not to do it for reasons of they can make a lot more money by using the existing copper that was strung so many years ago. Maybe the next one, Crystal. These are our cabinets, and these are the cabinets in Calais. These are called colo buildings. If you look, the one on the left is where all the DBU connections come in. The one on the right is where the ISPs put their equipment. When a customer comes on the system, we make a connection between those two buildings, which then gets to their home. The next one. Here's a look at a patch panel inside one of those buildings. Every one of those little yellow connections there is somebody's connection to the network. That little thin, about the fiber inside that, underneath that yellow casing, is about the width of a human hair. And it's something we haven't been able to maximize, be able to get, to push more data down than it can handle. So we're waiting to see when that's going to happen, but it doesn't look anywhere in the next 100 years that they're going to be maximizing what's going on there. Next one. This is a quick run on the financials, how we did this. We didn't want the taxpayers to be on the hook for this. So we went to the towns, and we asked them if they would secure the notes, meaning that if this network were to fail, if we weren't able to make this all work, then yes, the taxpayers would make the payments. But this basic service is basically paid for by the people who want the service. So if you sign up with Pioneer for $60 a month, $59.95, Pioneer then sends DBU $25 of that. That goes towards paying back the notes. That goes towards paying for the network, paying for the maintenance on it. Anything that has pole licensing, insurance, all that kind of stuff is taken out of that $25. So it only gets paid for by the people who use the service. You look at this, and as an example of how people are paying their broadband bills right now. If you have Spectrum and you send them $150 a month, you send them $150 a month, and that's it. You don't see any more. You get whatever service they give you. Same with satellite, same with consolidated. You send every dime to them and it stays there. With a municipal broadband network like the one in Calais and Baileyville, $25, that goes back to the towns. So we figure it's about a 20-year run to get this paid back. And we figure this is at least a 100-year investment. So at the end, when those 20 years are up, but I actually personally think it's going to be sooner than that, but when that's up, that revenue stream continues. It doesn't stop. That $25 comes back to the towns. So that money at that point can be used to upgrade equipment if we need to, or it can be a revenue stream that goes back to the citizens of the towns. So it's really a model that the banks were overly excited with this. When they saw that how we were going to do this, we had 4 banks competing for our business, driving the interest rates down. So it certainly is something that was attractive to the financial community. And the next one. This basically is just, I've gone over a lot of this stuff, so I won't read it again twice. The more important piece on this slide is that there is a lot of economic money, a lot of federal money coming at broadband now. It's coming from a number of directions: USDA, the Maine Connectivity Authority, ConnectMe, FCC, and there's hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars that are going towards rural broadband. And it's important, in my opinion, that we need to be at the table where this gets discussed, because if we're not, we're going to see what's happened for the last 20 years is the big ISPs are the ones talking in the room, and they're the ones that make this happen for themselves, not necessarily for the community. And these are public funds. And I want to end on one little piece of math I did. There was a project called an RDOF. It was a federal program for rural communications. And they basically gave Elon Musk for his satellites $44 million, and they gave Consolidated $48 million to improve broadband in Maine. It sounds good on paper. Problem with that is they were given 10 years with which to do it, which who knows what's going to be happening here in 10 years. But I did a little quick math, and that $88 million, had they put that towards middle mile fiber or other fiber projects in Maine, that could have built 4,000 miles of fiber in Maine, of build a network similar to what Down East Broadband is, that would have been future-proof, would have been something that'll be out there forever. The Elon Musks of the world, their satellites are not going to be out there forever. They're going to get outdated. They're going to get overloaded. They're not going to be able to handle the capacity, and they're expensive. So that was not, in my opinion, a good place to put money. So anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. Chris, you can weigh in, and I'm certainly will be here for the entire time to answer any questions if anybody has them, and I'll send it over to Chris.
Yeah, we've, as Danny said, we've finished most of our town. In fact, the last folks in our town who don't have broadband running to the pole in front of their house, the last 22 houses and camps, they're actually running it this week, and that's pretty good. The one thing I will say about when they run that fiber, their contract says they do it to 15 below zero. That's awful cold running that stuff, but they are out there doing that, and we're darn happy they are. I have a lot of people at the all the way at the end of the Grand Falls Road who want to see their fiber improved. Couple things to consider is your demographics in your town. I'll tell you right now, the younger your town is, the quicker uptake there will be for fiber. One of our issues in Baileyville is we have people who are older. They have a system that is already working for them, either Spectrum or Consolidated, and they know which button to push to get the TV on. They know which button to push to get it off. Convincing those folks to take is going to be a hard sell for towns where you've got a high elderly population. We know what it's going to cost us to get to where we can pay the bills for this on a regular basis, and for us, that's about 300 customers, and then anything over, say, 350, we know that money's going to actually go back to the town. Will we achieve that this year? Probably not. It may take a year or two, but in the long run, the town's not going to have to pay back that loan. It'll be paying itself back.
Hey, Chris, let me put something in here. Just a quick, this is something new that just landed at me to address the elderly piece you're talking about. Lady at the Advertiser suggested that we do some meetings or classes at the local high school to explain to the young kids exactly what this network is out there. And I thought that was a really good idea, because these young kids are going to go back to grandma and grandpa and mom and dad, and they could be an asset to help their parents make these decisions, because these are money decisions. The parents will understand it when they realize they can cut their communication bills by 2/3 if they just take a little bit of a leap, and if someone can help them through it, if their grandson or granddaughter can do it, I think that's a plus. So I think that may help address that.
Right. And I mean, that's a great idea, because I know right now, if I have an issue with my computer, first thing I do is grab my grandkids. If they're not around, I grab my daughter. So, trying to fix, I'm not bad, but I'm not there in their league. But this does take more than a week to run fiber in your town. You'll find it does take probably multiple months to actually run it, depending on the size of your town. It's fairly painless. They're fairly unobtrusive. They're off to the side, and you don't see them very often getting in the way. So once you make that commitment to go with broadband, it's a fairly seamless process. The key is just getting people on board. The installations take a bit longer than traditional cables, simply because there hasn't been anything run there before. People are used to a cable company coming in, connecting them within 20, 30 minutes. This will take usually a little bit longer, but for the most part, the customers love it. They love the service they're getting. I ran a test the other day, and I'm supposed to get 100 down and 100 up in the Baileyville town office. I got 109 down and 108 up, so I can't complain.
Another point that when towns are looking at this, the incumbents will try to scare your town away from it, saying it's way too expensive, and that there's been a lot of misinformation around that. This last election saw a couple of towns vote municipal down, and the information that they had been fed for months was completely erroneous. That had no basis in fact. But if you notice one of those slides that I showed you with all the fiber on it, notice that Down East Broadband was the very bottom of the poll. There was a change that the legislature made with the PUC. It was called the 880 rule. It used to be that the telephone company had the bottom spot and everybody else had a jockey for position up the pole. And that means sending an engineer to every single telephone pole, measuring, seeing where you can put a cable. Well, the PUC said, no, we're going to allow these municipal utilities to be on the bottom of the pole or the back of the pole or the side of the pole. That one change reduced the Baileyville cost by $145,000. That one move. So when an ISP is talking to your select boards and is telling you that fiber is too expensive, have them get a hold of us. We'll have another conversation with them.
Yeah. I know Hamden was one of those towns that voted down municipal fiber, and Spectrum in particular put a lot of effort into steering them away because A, they're a large town, and B, they have a lot of folks who take their service up there. The one thing with Washington County, I really don't think you're going to find them fighting too hard to keep us, because the amount of money they have to spend just to keep the system going, they don't see the number of people per mile that they want to see. They'd love to see 30 people per mile taking their service. And when you start talking 10, their eyes glaze over and they just kind of lose interest. And that's what we have in our area. We have low density, and they're not that.
You make a good point there though, Chris. When we've reached out to them, that argument doesn't work for the incumbents anymore. The fact to say that there's not enough people, you need, Time Warner wants 25 customers per mile. That doesn't work anymore, because in the Calais, we're an open access network. Time Warner can come to us and can put equipment in our cabinets and begin to compete for service. Consolidated can do the same thing. We're open access. They don't want to compete. Time Warner or Spectrum has never competed for customers in Maine ever. In New Hampshire, it's Comcast. There's no Spectrum here. It's just Comcast. If you're in Maine, it's Spectrum. It's not Comcast. They like the idea of no competition. We opened up the DBU network to competition, and it shows you where their intent is. We've taken 2/3 of the cost. They say that because it was too expensive, because there wasn't enough people, we've taken it away. We built the infrastructure, we maintain the infrastructure, and we manage the infrastructure. All they got to do is put some lasers in the cabinet and start selling their service, but they won't do it.
Now, Dan and Chris, so one of your previous slides, or one of your slides, had mentioned that you are happy to assist communities with answers to questions or whatever. And so they can just contact the Down East Broadband utility via the website or phone.
Yep, just go to the website. There's a contact there. Laurel Perkins, she'll filter the questions back to us. We've shared was referred to as our interlocal agreement. That's a lot of legal work. I've shared that with numerous towns across Maine. That's how we were able to legally put these two towns together to work together. And we've had it amended now. So now it's open-ended, so we can add towns like Alexander, Indian Township, maybe Cooper and Princeton next, to this agreement. So we've shared that deep legal stuff. And yeah, we're wide open. We will help any community that wants to do this.
That's fantastic. Do either you or Chris have anything else to put in right now?
Nope.
No, I think we can take questions.
Fantastic. So if Lisa and Nathan are ready to talk about Roque Bluffs and their approach. Lisa, are you there?
I am here.
Fantastic. I'll let you rock and roll.
Okay, Nate, you want to do it like we did on Tuesday? I go first.
Yeah, sure. That worked well. I'll chime in if
Okay.
spirit moves me.
Okay, so I'm Lisa Hanscom. I have been select person in Roque Bluffs for 19 years. In the last project that I worked on was the broadband project. And I'm the one that spearheaded going for a USDA reconnect grant. It was the first year out, actually. We're one of 4 that actually got put the horse before the cart, or however you want to say that. We were one of 4 that actually did get funded under that grant. But the way it came about for us is about 3.5 years ago, 4 years ago. I think it was 3.5. We actually started getting complaints from some of our residents. They weren't able to take classes online. They were being timed out of tests. If they were streaming TV, they couldn't. You know, there was just a lot of complaints. And one of the other problems we were having is actually our telephone services were going down for months with Fairpoint. So we didn't have telephone, we didn't have internet. There is a portion of our town that actually does get Spectrum, but it's it's like 40 homes out of the whole town that was getting Spectrum. The rest of us were getting 3/1, 3/2 as our internet service at that time. You know, and I will say, as a selectman, and this is something you can think about when you're approaching your select people, but as a select person, I really didn't think we could do anything, truthfully. What are we supposed to do? I mean, it's Consolidated or Fairpoint at the time. It was Spectrum. It was these wireless companies. It was even Axiom. They had a wireless service out here. We really didn't think we could do anything, but we told our residents we will start looking into it. For us, the whole process to apply for this grant only took 14 months. We did a lot of learning as a board. But one of the first things we had done was we had reached out to Spectrum, we reached out to Fairpoint, and we got the whole thing that they could not improve their service to the rest of us. There was not enough homes to make it a good business decision on their end. That was a hard no. And to go back to something Chris said, they do care if they lose us, because when we put in the grant, they did put in, well, Consolidated did, I don't know what they call it, but sort of a grievance against our grant application, because they didn't want us to be able to get the grant anyway. But so as we talked, we're thinking, okay, so we started the discussion with Axiom, with Mark actually, about what were the possibilities for the town of Red Bluffs. And it came up that we could look at putting in our own broadband. Like I said, we had looked at little antennas on top of the telephone poles. We looked at satellite, we looked at, wireless, and we had actually like 10 years before that went with Axiom. They had put up a wireless antenna on top of one of our buildings. At that time, it was great service. There wasn't a lot of people on it, but as more and more people got on it, the service got bad again, so we knew we didn't want to do that. I will say in the year that we were doing this project, I had 6 public hearings. I had people, we decided to do a lot of public hearings. As the chair of the select board, I created a broadband committee that would work on this. And let me see, sorry, I just came from work, so my mind's on my EMA job, sorry. So at each step, of information we learned, we brought it to the town in a public hearing and asked them at each step, what do you think? Do you want us to continue down this path? Do you want us to look into broadband? And they kept saying yes. So what the Board of Selectmen decided is that we wanted to put in fiber, independent fiber to every home in the town of Red Bluffs that wanted it. Even if you live down a mile dirt road, we did not want to have the same situation that we have now, where depending on where you live meant whether or not you had good internet. That is something we wanted to avoid. We did have Pioneer reach out to us to discuss whether or not they would build it. At the time, they only wanted to build along the tarred road. So we actually settled on going with Axiom because they had the same vision as we did, that this internet, this broadband, this fiber would go to every home, no matter where you lived, even if it was down a dirt road. And I don't know if anybody knows Road Blast, but like we have 2 private associations down 9-mile roads and stuff like that. We wanted to make sure those homes had it. We got to the point as we started writing the grant, we actually had a gentleman in town who's a professor at the Arizona University who writes a lot of grants. He helped with this grant because it was not an easy grant to write. We went to a town meeting right before the grant was to be submitted, asking the town, first of all, for permission to submit the grant, because although this was a $1.3 million project, it only paid for like 2/3 of it. So we would still have a $200,000 amount that the town would have to come up with, which we decided to go out for a loan. We discussed that. But the second article in our vote was that if we did not receive the grant, we would actually take out the money through a loan and pay for the whole system ourselves. And actually it was overwhelming. It was the biggest meeting in town that we ever had, and it overwhelmingly passed. And so we actually submitted the grant. Now, I had gotten done as a site person, so it was a few months later that we actually got the approval saying that we received the money. We were, like I said, one of 4 in the state of Maine that actually received that grant. I will say it hasn't started to be built out. I will caution people or let people know, so you know up front, if you're dealing with the federal government, things take time. You have to follow a procedure, you have to jump through hoops and all that. And then we also, it didn't come up this time, but even the licensing process for the telephone poles takes a while to get done. So I'll let Nate take over.
Thanks, Lisa. That's I think a good summary of, what I saw from the town's perspective. A lot of work getting to, the almost the hardest part of these projects is getting to the point of being able to feel like you're really starting to move. The communication is, I've now been involved in, I don't even know how many towns, many towns around the state that are going through this process and are at one stage or the other, from the just starting to think about it to actually doing construction. I'm involved in projects along that whole spectrum right now. And, by far the hardest part of that is getting people in your town on board. This is really not a technical problem. This is a political problem, more than anything. And some ways to mitigate that, or to sort of, smooth that process, like Lisa said, she had 6 public hearings in the span of a year. That's really typical. You gotta give people, you think, oh, I had, a couple of hearings and, I announced it well, and, anybody that wanted to come up, surely they showed up. Well, no, people, they don't turn out to this until they decide they're ready to turn out to it. And you got to give them ample opportunity to do that, because I think Lisa made a really good point when we were doing this presentation a couple of days ago. She said, you got to find the people that are saying no. And those people are going to sit home, bad talk you to the neighbors, post on Facebook, on private groups that you don't even know exist. And you're going to have this quiet opposition running in the background. And then you go to your public hearing to vote on it, and you think, oh, I've been talking to people for months and it's been great, everyone's on board. Well, suddenly you got 40 people in a room, and 15 of them are rabidly opposed to the project, and you didn't even know it. So you got to get ahead of that. You got to do the public hearings. You got to do emails. You got to do social media. You got to put the flyers at the post office and the local church and the town hall. You got to send stuffers with your tax bills if you can do that. Think outside the box. Every way you can possibly communicate to people for way longer than you have the tolerance for. that's still not enough. There's like no amount of outreach that's too much in this project. Some of the things that get people excited about this are, like Lisa said, universal coverage. That's a thing that you're only going to get out of municipal broadband. None of the big providers are, and even none of the small providers, if they're self-funding, are going to be able to do that. It is expensive to reach everyone. But Axiom strongly believes, I believe, this is the world we're in. This is this is a utility that is rapidly becoming as important as power. And the people that don't think that's the case are the generation that came up without it. Everyone under 40 really understands the importance of this and the need for it. Getting I think the suggestion to present to the school kids, that's one that I haven't done before, but I think that was a heck of a suggestion. It's a word of mouth. It really is a grassroots political campaign, and getting the kids who understand it and getting them excited and getting them talking to the older generation. Part of my job, Axiom's a small company, so I wear a lot of hats, and part of my job is taking orders from people. Everyone at Axiom, we take inbound calls for fiber service. So I've talked to hundreds and hundreds of people around the state over the last 5 years about, what this is going to look like, how the service is going to get to them, what makes it financially viable, hearing everyone's concerns. And one of the things that's hardest to get through to people, one of the biggest barriers is people understanding this cutting the cord. People, so many people say, oh, well, I got to have a landline, so people can reach me because I don't have cell service, or, I want to be able to watch local news. How can I do that with streaming? And it's totally possible, but the answers aren't straightforward. It's not as simple as, oh, you want to stream local news, you go to XYZ website. It's going to depend on where you are, what market you're in, several services offer that. So which one's the best price? Which one has other services other shows, other content that you already want? So there's nuance to that conversation, and that can be a lot to sort of get into and get people to understand in a 20-minute phone call while they're calling to ask you about service. So getting ahead of that, getting the opinion leaders in the community, having one-on-one small conversations with people so that they can get up to speed and really understand that, the fiber may be only $10 a month more, less expensive than your Spectrum package, but you're also, going to be able to go and, get 3 different streaming services. And for $20 a month more, you have far better internet and far more useful content, meaningful content to you. So I think there's a strong economic argument to be made for the consumer, but it can be a lift to get there from an education standpoint. Timeline also, managing expectation is important. Some of our early projects, we were maybe a little bit optimistic in how long all of this was going to take to get up to speed. So now we've got people that have had an order on the books for 2 years that are calling us back and saying, "Are you serious? Is anything happening here?" And so managing that expectation early, in statute. The incumbents, when you license the poles, they have a certain number of months to grant you an attachment. Those numbers have been being wildly blown out of the water. We have projects that we thought were 7 months from inception to granting a license, and some of those projects now we're looking at 14 or 15 months just to get licenses to go on the poles. So that's something that is going to have to be addressed both in regulatory and statute, but that's not something that's going to change in the next year. That's a long process to solve that. So I'm seeing a fair number of questions popping up here. I could certainly, like Danny, I could talk all night about this, but maybe give a pause on it and see where we go with questions. And
I think that sounds great.
So,
And
Elaine, can I just add a couple of things?
of course,
'Cause,
absolutely.
Nate brought them up. Yeah, one of the things, we did have the 6 public hearings, but I also almost knocked on every single door in the town of
Yep.
Road Bluffs.
Yep.
I spent a lot of days going to houses to actually talk to individuals to get this passed. But I also want to say we're very similar. We were actually Road Bluffs. Callis and Baileyville were just starting their plans to build out. So we were paying a lot of attention to their model. And we also went to Cranberry Isles to look at their model because they had gotten that big grant before and they had almost finished their build out. So we based a lot of what we were getting to, because we do actually will be receiving revenue back for those who actually take the service. But where we're on a peninsula and we're surrounded by 2 towns that don't have, and we asked them, but they didn't want to join us in getting fiber at that time. We were kind of isolated the way we could do this. We didn't have another town at the time that wanted to join in with us. But we did base our model, our financial plan and everything, sort of a cross between the Callis and Baileyville and the Cranberry Isles model.
Fantastic, thank you. Now, we do have some questions in the chat. Crystal, would you like to handle those?
Sure. We have, first I want to share a comment, which some of you may have already seen, but Lubeck noted that one of the selling points they use for helping older folks understand the importance of broadband is the availability of telehealth. And I imagine that you also talk about communicating with loved ones, which is also very important. So questions, talk about the economy of scale that happens when contiguous towns work together.
I can take that one if you want. Yeah, there's strength in numbers. And one of the, like in the town that I happen to live in, Cooper, was a very small town. And we've received our engineering study. We know what it's going to cost to build here. And it's a lot of money for a town of 120 people. So obviously you have a town of 300 people, it's, a better mix. But one of the things that makes this a very unique moment is that hundreds of millions of dollars are coming at Maine's little towns to actually fix this problem. I mean, that's part of the reason for these ARPA funds. And just in Washington County alone, the Washington County commissioners have got $3.1 million sitting in their checkbook right now that has to go to either water, sewer, broadband, or economic relief to people that were in businesses that were impacted by COVID. So it's a very narrow range, but broadband is one of them. Next year, Washington County is going to get another $3 million. So there's 6 million right there, a portion of which could go towards helping these little towns, which makes that economy of scale actually work. Connect Me is another place. They just announced, I was just talking to Peggy Schaefer the other day, that their next round of infrastructure and planning grants have started. So towns that want to do this, they need to go to the Connect Me website. Maybe Crystal, you could throw that up there. Planning grants is the first one they're going to do. So if you haven't gone anywhere with this and you want to start some planning, that's the place to go because they've got funds available. So taking advantage of the resources that are now here, because they're not going to be here forever. And like I said earlier, these incumbents, you can guarantee they are at the table and they're looking to grab some of these funds. And if we're not there to compete for it, it's not going to go in the direction we'd like.
Thank you, Danny. Well,
Can
Crystal,
I just chime in? Danny
Yeah.
made a really good point there at the end, that the direction we'd like. So, that's not because Axiom wants to grab business or Down East Broadband needs more subscribers to pay their bills. That's because everyone in this room, well, I don't know who all's here. Maybe we got a lurker from Spectrum in the room, but most people involved in this discussion really do have a common purpose here. We're looking for high quality, future-proof, universal coverage, affordable broadband. Those are goals that are not shared by the incumbent providers. So just want to hammer on that. I mean, if you can in your town, you got to start with having conversations with the incumbents, and if you can get them to build an awesome network that covers everyone, but I haven't seen that happen yet. So
That's a fantastic point. Crystal, did you want to take the next question?
Yes, sure. There are several questions that are specific to DBU, so let's go through those. In the DBU model, who manages the infrastructure built in the communities? Is it the town or the DBU?
DBU we have one employee. He's the network operator it's a local businessman that he's paid to be able to manage the customer subscriptions. So when Pioneer or an ISP says we have a customer on Washington Street, then the network operator makes the actual physical connection up at those buildings that I'd shown earlier. So we manage the network. DBU manages it. The ISPs provide the signal.
Yeah, and that's actually the case in Road Bluffs too. The town of Road Bluffs will own the infrastructure, and then we're only, because we're 300 residents, and we didn't feel like we had enough for competition. We decided on hiring one internet service provider at the moment.
Okay, another question, and again, this may relate to Road Bluffs, or you probably have your own answer for it. What size loan did DBU go for to get the fiber laid in Calais and Woodland Baileyville? Were there grants to help?
We didn't do any granting. The network bill was 3.1 million for Calais and Baileyville. And like I mentioned in the financial slide, we set it up, so it would be paid back by the subscribers. We knew the take rate would be there to make this work, and the banks, they believed it as well. So we did not have any granting. Unfortunately for us, or it's fortunate now that Calais and Baileyville is up and running and people are getting fantastic service, especially through COVID. But there were not the grant opportunities that there are now. That's why I keep hammering back on people. If these towns want to get this done, like Nate mentioned this as well, you've got to get out there and you have got to be a force. Even if you don't know much about what broadband is, what you don't have, and you need to be a voice in that room. And we didn't have the opportunity in Calais and Baileyville. I wish we could have. Alexander, on the other hand, who just joined, they were able to get a $145,000 grant from Connect Me to help offset their bill. Their bill is around $490,000, and they got 145 of that picked up by Connect Me. So, and now that was a couple of years ago. So there's now even more money out there. So there's ways to do this, but you got to be in the room.
Yeah, so for Road Bluffs, we went out for the USDA Reconnect grant, and between that grant and a Connect Maine grant, out of a $1.2 million project, we got over, I think we got $98,000 to help build it out, and the rest was our match that we had to come up with. So we went with a bank loan, even after looking at a municipal bond. At the time, the interest rate was actually better to go through our bank than a municipal bond. So
I'll take that opportunity, if I may, to speak very briefly about some of the challenges with the federal grant. So Axiom has helped a number of towns, as I've said, and every town's unique, and Axiom's a small enough company that we've been able to work with these towns and sort of help them in their own unique ways. And 3 of the towns that we're currently involved in have received large federal government grants, which is awesome. There's towns that are getting internet that just, they wouldn't have got it without those grants. So, I don't want to discount the possibility of these for you. But I also want to caution 2 things. One, as Lisa mentioned, the amount of work is vast. The requirements to get one of these grants in and have them look decent and be competitive, it's hundreds and hundreds of hours of work. You need a team and you need dedication, and you got to give yourself a bunch of months to get it done. So just don't think it's easier than it is. Second of all, really consider your options for, Roque Bluff's, had a plan in place where they could get a municipal bond and make enough money, same as Down East Broadband, make enough money from revenue where the town is able to pay back the infrastructure bond. The USDA grants add a lot of overhead. There's a lot of engineering work. There's just a lot of hoops to jump through that add a ton of cost, and super hard to quantify it. Because what you can't really compare one project to another exactly. But I am guessing that federally funded, USDA funded projects are probably 30 to 40% more expensive at the end of the day than a self-funded project, and take longer to come to fruition. So, if you're paying a 20% match and the feds are paying 80% of your funding, that's not to say that 30% more expensive should scare you off. I mean, that may still be your best option. But be aware that there's some challenges and pitfalls to it. It's not quite as free as the money sounds like it is when you get started.
I'd like to piggyback something on what Nate's saying there. This is, again, a very unique time in that he's right. The USDA loans they're onerous. They're tough to work through. I mean, I met with the regional planner for USDA here a couple of months ago, and they're tough work. They're a lot of work. But what's happening with these new funds, the ARPA funds and other money from the FCC, is they're passing this money down largely to allowing the states to decide how it gets spent. So you're not dealing with that federal overview that Nate and Axiom and Roque Bluff are having to deal with the USDA loan. So that's, again, why it's really important. And maybe, Crystal, you could put the Maine Connectivity Authority website in that chat. They have, get up on their website, and they're just getting formed. They're just getting started, and they're trying to figure out how they're going to spend probably $500 million by the time this is all done. So there's a lot of opportunity there, but the small towns that are trying to make this happen, I think Nate brought it up, and I've seen this over 15 years of doing this. I remember a guy back in Vermont who built a fiber network back in 2009. He looked at me and he said, "Danny, if you expect the incumbents to do this, you're out of your mind. If you want it done, do it yourself." And over all this time, at the beginning, I thought he was crazy, but I don't anymore. Yeah. So we need to be in that room, because there's going to be a lot of decisions made at the state level, which will take some of the onerous stuff that USDA stuff throws at you out of the picture.
That's great. Thank you. While Crystal's working on that link, there was a question. Let's see. What are the anticipated annual and capital maintenance issues?
There's a good one, Nate. I will give you my 2 cent perspective, then you weigh in, because you're in from the ISP side. Is that fiber there's a lot less maintenance. There's a lot less work involved with maintaining a fiber structure. Just for an example, between 2 telephone poles, if you have a copper cable going there, it's putting about 70,000 pounds of pressure between those 2 poles as it's swinging in the wind. A fiber connection is around 7,000. So it can whip around in the wind with that steel strand that's hanging onto it. So maintenance wise, it's not a lot. I mean, you have to do some maintenance if a car crashes into a telephone pole, that kind of stuff. I know my 25 years at the mill, we had fiber there for probably 18 of it. And we went down once in 18 years. And that was because somebody was in the colo cabinet down by Pratt Chevrolet and they snipped the wrong wire. They took the mill down. Yeah. So I'll let you take it from there, Nate, because you're on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, I'll let Nate answer this. I'm sorry, but I wanted to say one of the things that kind of sold us on fiber too was the fact that, maybe if a tree lands on it, but we probably were going to be at the bottom of the pole, so less likely it was going to happen. That's one of the biggest things that Nate kept telling us, is it probably wasn't going to be that big of a deal, but that would be something that we would be responsible for.
Yep. Yeah, no, maintenance from my perspective as an operator, fiber is awesome. it is just I mean, Axiom has a number of different fixed wireless technologies deployed. We have DSL over copper phone line deployed, and we have several different flavors of fiber technology deployed throughout Maine right now. And by far the easiest to maintain, the least expensive to maintain is the fiber. And you might say, well, who cares about the operator? That means also for the customer, right? You know, the fewer people that call me is less work for me, but it's also, you know, customer experience is much, much, much better on the fiber. It almost always works. If it doesn't work, it's almost always a physical problem. You know, there's not a configuration issue. There's not an antenna turned in the wind. It's up and you're getting the speed that you're paying for, or something's broken and we got to go find out where it's broken and fix that. The glass is actually shockingly strong. You think, oh, glass, you know, you think of dropping a plate on the floor and it's going to break. And certainly the fiber can break. I wish I had a cable here to demonstrate with, but what it really doesn't like is pinching. You know, if you kind of pull it in a loop and pull that loop tight, that'll break a fiber. Lay a fiber on the ground, drive a truck over it, chances are pretty good it's not going to break. I don't recommend that. That's not a best practice, but in reality, I've seen that happen, you know, many times. I've consistently been shocked how much abuse a fiber cable can take and continue to just not just work, but work flawlessly, work, you know, completely up to spec. So when there is maintenance, it can be expensive. You know, if you have a high count trunk, you know, 144 count or 288 count fiber running trunk line run down a street, and you do have a car versus pole, or you do have a windstorm and a tree falls on it. And, you know, yes, I've seen fiber come down and take, or a tree come down, or a limb come down, take out the power, take out some of the communication, and then stop, or be hanging on the fiber but not having broken it. But when that does break, that's not something that, you know, that you're going to fix in your town yourself. You're going to have a restoration contract with a construction company, most likely, and you're going to have an SLA for restoration. They're going to come out and say, you know, 24 hours as soon as the area is safe, as soon as, you know, there's no live power on the ground, and there aren't other environmental hazards, the clock starts ticking, and they have a guarantee to restore you in that amount of time. Typically, that's an insurable expense. We've only had to tap insurance a couple of times at Axiom, but most recently we had a transformer catch on fire right above our fiber and actually melted the fiber line. That was good fun, but we got a contractor out there. That was on an island. Did take a couple of days to get the contractor out there, but we got the contractor out there, got everyone restored, and you know, we paid I don't know what the deductible was, but we paid a deductible and insurance covered the rest of it. So.
Okay, so let's see here. We have a question in the DBU model. Who actually manages the infrastructure build in communities, the town or DBU? Also, how are loan payments being made now while you're still building up to optimal take rate to cover the payments? And then to clarify that question, who builds the infrastructure?
Well, DBU maintains it. We're working off of a line of credit right now. That's how we started. We're basically building the network. It'll be in March. The board, at our last meeting, we're going over some financial stuff at that point. We're going to be going for long-term financing in March. So it's most likely we're looking at a 20-year note. But during the build process, we only took the line of credit. We took funds as we needed them, so that we weren't being hit with a huge interest rate. So as we built, now that we're built and we can now convert, we'll put an RFP out to numerous banks and we'll get the best deal we possibly can to pay back the note. Did I hit all 3 points there?
I think you did. And then we have a comment. Getting these towns to come together to go with broadband is the rub. We have wanted to include Edmonds and Trescott as they are so close, but they are not responsive. Any input or advice?
So I'd love to answer that real quick in the fact that we had the same problem 3 years ago. Machias and Jonesboro did not see the need for having high-speed internet, even though the 3-ring binder through Route 1 actually went through both of their towns. What I would suggest or something is really actually start talking to them now, because after COVID, a lot of people in a lot of towns realized why having internet and having good internet became important. Everything going telehealth, schools going remote, just having to be on the internet. A lot of people's minds have changed in the past year and a half about the need for internet and high-speed internet and why we should actually have it. I will say, I think 3 years ago, when all of us were starting, we had a harder time convincing people that we needed fiber and we needed high-speed internet, because a lot of people really didn't see the need for it. After COVID, I do think there's a different thought process out there now.
I can give you an experience of when I've talked to many, many towns on this, but when the Alexander bill was out there and we went to have the initial meeting with the town, there was one gentleman, he was probably in his late 70s. He was adamant that all he needed was 2 bars on his cell signal, and that was his granddaughter could play what game she needed to play and all this kind of stuff. So and then this younger woman, who was probably half his age, was coming in with the same argument. And I'm like, holy smokes, we got 2 ends of the spectrum here. We have the elderly and we have young people, and they both don't get it. So I made this mention at the Coopertown meeting, and I've done it at numerous other ones, but I looked around the room because I'm an older guy. And I looked around the room and I looked at these people and I said, do you realize that in 20 to 25 years that 80% of the people in this room will be dead? That means 80% of your tax base is gone. I said, do you really think that the internet's going away? Do you think the only way you're going to survive is if you bring younger people on board? Because they are not going to come where there isn't decent broadband. You can't sell a house that doesn't have decent broadband. These are basic arguments that I think when you put it in front of them, and in this particular case in Alexander, it was quite comical, actually, in the end. The guy who jumped down my throat at the beginning, at the end, I said to him, because he was all worried about his taxes going up, I said, your taxes aren't raised on this. I said, it's paid for by the people who buy the service. He stood up and looked at me and says, well, why in the hell didn't you say that in the first place? So I said, good point. He was one of the people at the Alexander town meeting that went around and collected the votes for when they overwhelmingly decided to join the DBU, and he was right on board. But he just had to be in a room and talked with. And I think that's where a lot of this lies. There's a lot of misinformation out there.
Yeah, can I add also, I think some of the misinformation is like a lot of people kept saying, well, why can't we go wireless? 5G's coming, 5G's coming. We don't need fiber. And I know Daniel had mentioned this on Tuesday. It's, even the 5G is on the backbone of fiber. You need fiber to get 5G. And I said, we can't even get 3G in Rope Bluffs. How do you think 5G is coming? I mean, so we had a lot of that because there is a lot of misinformation out there about what is going to be the best thing to have. And we had a lot of people coming to these meetings saying, well, look, 5G is coming. We don't need to spend this money. And I'm going, well, you're never going to see it here.
I'd chime in with 2 follow-on points. One about 5G briefly, because that comes up all the time. I had a really interesting conversation. I was at PCT in Machias, the US Cellular store, a couple of weeks ago, getting a new phone. Bit of a disaster for me. Phone unexpectedly died. I live by my phone. It's my office. So I was in there having a little freak out and discussing which phone I'm going to get. Am I going to get a 5G phone? And, they're in the business of selling the fancy phones, obviously. And they said, the rep I was talking to said, right now there is some 5G. And I said the same thing Lisa just said. When are we ever going to get 5G here? He said, there is 5G. There's a lot of 5G on Route 1. But he said the service is actually worse when you're on the 5G network because 5G, the part of what it is the size of each cell is much smaller. You need a lot more antennas. And when you apparently, was news to me, when the phone hands off the signal from a 5G network to a 4 or a 3G network, there's quite a bit of lag as it does that handoff. So you're driving along, you're in 5G, you pass through a couple of cells, you're still in 5G. Oh, your phone didn't grab that one, or they stopped the construction there for some reason. Now you're dropping calls. It's actually worse than if you were just on 3G all the way across. 3G, it's reliable. It's maybe not fiber speeds, but you got decent speed. So, 5G is not the panacea. A decade from now, 2 decades from now in Down East Maine, maybe we'll be there. But then we'll have 7G in the rest of the country and we'll still be behind. So keep that in mind as you talk to people. The other piece I wanted to mention is about the bringing towns together. I have seen that be very, very challenging. This is a hard enough sell to talk to residents of one town about this. And so many of our rural towns, have their own way of being, their own personalities, the own way that they work and they think. We are doing a project in the Mid-Coast. We've been talking to this group of towns for, probably getting on 5 years now. 3 towns, all adjacent, all need better broadband. We're going to go in on a utility together. Ended up not doing that. And on 3 different timelines, staggered, each town eventually got to the point where they're now building fiber networks in each of these towns independently because they couldn't get out of their own way and come together. So not to say don't try to do this with another town, certainly try to make that happen, but don't put all your eggs in that basket. Be thinking about another strategy. What do you do if it's just got to be my town? How do we, what's our fallback plan? How do we move that forward? And just don't. I don't know a lot about how DBU, really initially kicked off. So feel free to chime in and correct me here. But I am guessing that there was somebody, and maybe this is Dan. Somebody just had to take that ball and run with it, and take the leap of faith and say, we're going to do this, and we're going to get enough towns on board to make it happen. And once there's a product there to sell, it's easy to sell. But in the conceptual stage where everyone's just, thinking and floating ideas, hard to get all the players together.
We had an economic development director that was hired by the 2 towns looking for all sorts of economic development ideas. They decided there was strength in numbers with the 2 towns. So This person, Julie Jordan, she's not there any longer, but she was looking at all sorts of economic development. And she was a good friend of mine. And I spoke with her I was at the mill at the time, and we talked about doing these fiber networks. And it took off from there. And she was a champion. She really was able to, through tons of meetings, like you mentioned, Nate, getting a lot of information out there, we were able to get the towns on board with it. And then when we set up the interlocal agreement that allowed these towns to then operate together. And then from there, that's where the interest, we're seeing these other towns one by one wanting to join in that interlocal agreement. So you really don't have to come at us with 15 towns.
Right.
You come at with 1. And you're right. I know it was probably 5 or 6 years ago, I had a conversation with the IT manager in Bar Harbor who was trying to do this. And this alludes to something you said earlier, which really struck a chord with me. He said to me he couldn't pull it off. And I said, why not? I said, there's got to be plenty of money in Bar Harbor. He said, I lost control of the message. Mm-hmm. He said, the word got out on Facebook, on Twitter, on everything you can think of about what a waste of money this was. Yep. And they built such a narrative out there that I'm a tech guy and I know what these networks can and will do. He couldn't get over it. Yeah. And they lost that effort. And I don't know what Bar Harbor's doing now, but it was losing control of the message. And that's where a lot of this issue you bring up about multiple towns trying to work together, because you've got forces out there, like you said, that don't show up until that meeting, that have been grumbling with a lot of misinformation in their heads for years, and they're going to try to work against you. So it isn't easy.
Yeah, I mean, not to boo-hoo on myself here, but about the message that gets out there. And I will say that the no's, please go looking for them, because they will not, because they don't believe this is going to happen. They just want to grumble. They will not show up until they did not show up until the meeting before the last meeting, our vote. And then all the yeses had stopped coming because we had had 4 already, and 4 or 5. And that last one, they showed up and they tore me apart. The no's did. And because there were no yeses there, they thought they were the ones in charge. It was kind of a surprise at the vote that they were overwhelmingly outvoted. But they were there. And I will say that you're talking about what got out on Facebook. There was this email going around that I did not know what I was talking about. We did not qualify for this grant. And I wasn't, that the Board of Selectmen were not too deep with deep thinkers. So, I mean, it does get out there, and this is another reason why I went knocking on doors, to let people know that I really had thought about this very deeply, and I was confident that we could get this grant, and I was very confident in the direction we were heading.
Now, as we are getting close to the end, I would like to ask Chris Laughlin, Baileyville Town Manager, to speak about the impact that this has had, because he does manage the town that Baileyville, which is the largest, there's a mill there that is the largest employer in Washington County. So Chris, can you talk about the economic development impact this has had?
As one of the biggest impacts that we've seen is that we've got folks who are now considering working from home, whereas before it was impossible. We had a young engineer and his family move to a house where he had hoped to work from home, and he ended up 3 months later going back to Ohio before we got broadband. Now we've got broadband. We've started to see some folks coming into town, opening up, working from home as opposed to from the office for those who are still out because of COVID. But we're starting to see that impact. Right now, the mill is preparing for another large rebuild. Unfortunately, they're not going to use a lot of new fiber, but they're poised to do that. And one of their selling points to get their engineers in here to work at the mill are high-speed broadband within the town. And so we're not, we've not only seen Baileyville see that, Calais has seen a big increase. Indian Township has just come on board. Princeton is right now looking like they're coming on board. So we're starting to see it start to pick up in the area. One of the things that is concerning, though, is you got a couple of towns that are sitting there thinking, oh, it's going to come to us. We'll get it for free. These other guys are paying for it. We'll get it for free. Well, if you don't have any investment in it, you're not going to get it. And I think what they will end up having is a deal that's counterproductive to their town. It's taken a long time to do this. It's taken a lot of effort, but I think in the long run, I mean, we've got a system that's up and running and operational. And because of that, we're seeing other towns get on board with us. One of the things that's kind of nice, though, is the DBU did the hard work in the beginning. These other towns are now able to come in. We can provide them how they need to get insurance and or become part of the DBU. We also provide them with the legal framework to do this on. So when they come on board, they're not having to foot that whole cost themselves. We've already done that, and those towns do see a benefit immediately when they come on board, in that we've already done the hard work, and they can share. They pay a smaller fee and share in that when they actually go in and become part of the network.
That's fantastic. Nathan, do you have anything to say on economic development with fiber?
Oh yeah, you bet I do. At Axiom, we are really a rural provider. That has always been our heart, and I don't really see us, going. We're not going to be in Portland. We're on the islands and the peninsulas and the camp roads. We're serving we talk about last mile, but we're serving way out in the last mile. That's our niche. And so we have a lot of towns with high seasonal populations, and it has been really remarkable. I mean, I expected this, but it has blown away my expectations with the number of people that, you know, their family owns a house and they used to come out for a week a year, maybe 2 weeks a year. Maybe they come out in the spring and then in the fall. We got people that are coming out, houses full of people, you know, multiple different nuclear families that are coming out to the family cottage and spending 4, 5, 6, 7 months in these, you know, what used to be vacation communities for them. And they're basically moving there. And, you know, maybe there's seasonal water, or maybe the house isn't insulated, so they're not really becoming a year-round resident of your community. But, you know, I'm talking to homeowners that are seeing increased rental. I'm talking to vacation people that are tickled to be able to continue to work. I'm talking to grandparents who are having their kids move back to their towns, and, you know, they're seeing their grandkids on a regular basis, and the kids are able to work and not just work with this one job that they're lucky enough, but the world is changing where you don't have a lack of opportunities. You can be in, you know, Eastport, Maine, and you can get a job in St. Louis, Missouri at, you know, St. Louis, Missouri prices, or, you know, New York City, you know, wage rates. That's the new world that we're living in. I mean, I had, it's not exactly economic development, but it shows the difference in mindset from before and after. I had on the first fiber project we did out on the Cranberry Isles, you always get these no's that Lisa's talking about. And I had this one guy that was just vocal. He came to all the meetings. He used to own a major business on the island. He was, you know, an opinion leader. This is a waste. And he was a seasonal resident. But this is a waste. You know, people don't even come here for this. People come here to get away from it all. Like, you know, why do we need that? Too much money, on, always in opposition. We built fiber. He signed up for fiber. You know, I'm out on the island going to a meeting or something. I'm standing on the dock waiting for the boat to leave the island. And this fellow comes up to me and he shakes my hand and he says, "Nate, I got to apologize. I was, you know, maybe kind of a jerk throughout this process. And now I've got the internet, and my other home is in Brooklyn, New York. And my internet here on an unbridged offshore island is better than my internet in Brooklyn, New York." That's the reality that you're looking at bringing fiber in. Don't let anyone understate or underplay that for you. This is a game changer. This is people in Washington County, in one of the poorest counties in the United States, can get internet service that is better than 99% of people in America. That's the reality that you can do for your communities.
Can we put you in an ad, Nate?
This is the best. And the thing is, if Calais, Baileyville, Alexander Township, Roque Bluffs, if all these communities can do this, and we did have a comment actually because Nate mentioned Eastport. We did have a comment from Eastport actually saying, if Calais and Woodland can do it, that is encouraging. Longtime rivals.
That's a good point.
Yeah, it is a good point, and it is an excellent point. So do we have other questions for DBU, Axiom, Roque Bluffs, Baileyville? Crickets, really? All right. So what I'm going to do is then I'm going to wind this up and just waiting a few minutes to see if anybody else chimes in with a question. Is that I want to give Nate and Lisa and Chris and Dan, if you have anything else to say to wind this up, what would you tell these communities if you could do it in like 1 minute? What would you tell them?
I would say, and I'll step in, I'd say be at these meetings. Be a voice. You've got to get they're public. You can say things and don't be embarrassed by what you don't know or what you think you know, but be at these meetings. I've been at this a long time, and I've seen the state of Maine waste millions and millions of dollars because the only person in the room was somebody who had a vested interest on getting public money. And in my opinion, all these hundreds of millions of dollars should be building public networks, no longer subsidizing private companies so they don't want to have to pay their labor. They build a public network and then let them compete. But that's my 2 cents is be at these meetings. Don't be the lone person in the room. You got to be at these meetings and open your mouth.
And I would suggest, at least on the town level, if you're trying to get broadband in your town, talk to people. I mean, talk in the meetings, talk to your selectmen, but talk to individual people. It's amazing what just talking face to face, educating people and explaining why it would be important for your community to have broadband. I mean, for me, one of the biggest things was, I have a grandson, 4 years old. I'm a blueberry farmer also. I want him to stay here, but I don't want him to live on a farmer's wage. I want him to be able to maybe consult with a different company, work the farm, but make good money because I want him to stay here. But just talk to people and don't be afraid to open your mouth and keep going, even when people tell you you're crazy.
My one takeaway is build your committee. No one, you're going to burn out. You're not going to get it done no matter who you are. I mean, you could be the Superman and you wouldn't get it done by yourself. Get a crew of people, get, 3 to 10 people, 3 to 6 people, too many is too many also, but get a crew that is committed, has the time to put the work in, has skills, get communications people, get opinion leaders, get business people, get select board members, get anyone you can that is committed to this and have them speak to their neighbors, speak passionately, and just spread that word. You need that. That's where this happens. This happens in the year before most people see anything happening is where this really makes or breaks it. You getting that crew together, getting on a page, talking to your consultants, figuring out what your options are, getting solid and keeping that energy high, and then bringing that plan and that energy out to the broader community. I mean, this is a political campaign. This is like running for state legislature.
I'd like to add one last thing is on the DBU network. I don't even live in these 2 towns. So I have the connection at my house is 4 meg down and a half a meg up. But we have not had a single person. I feel like the Kevin Costner here, but if you build it, they will come. We have not had a single person say, this network is terrible. They sign up and they're in. Yeah. So I know the group in Vermont that did this 15 years ago, they built 1 mile. That's all they had to do, 1 mile. And they're now in 32 towns. Mm. So once people experience it and they realize that, this is like the overused word electricity, right? It should just run. You shouldn't have to think about it. Yeah. In New Hampshire, my house in New Hampshire, I pay $80 a month for a consolidated 1 gig connection. It's fiber to this house. I don't even think about it anymore. I've got TVs, computers, I got everything going all over here, and it doesn't even begin to hiccup. Yeah. So it's there and it does exist.
Yeah, for me, someone interviewed me once, Elaine, about this, and they asked me, well, where do you imagine the town of Robust being in 5 years or 10? And I said, I don't know really, because I don't know the potential because I've never had high-speed internet. I've never had it. I think my imagination stopped short.
Yeah.
I think
it's
that
amazing where we're going to go.
Frankly, I think that there's nothing good that has come out of COVID, nothing at all. But if we're going to pretend one good thing did come out of it, is that people have learned the importance of high-speed internet, of fiber, or the need for fiber. Work from home, the kids taking classes from home, telehealth, whatever it is. And Washington County deserves better, in my opinion, than by and large what's going on. I do want to say, because some of you talked about the local level, is that Sunrise County Economic Council is in the process of planning a broadband boot camp to help community leaders organize and become informed about the opportunities to expand high-speed internet. We plan sometime later in January to start that, maybe early February. but we will put out a save the date kind of notice. So watch our local happenings on Sunrise County Economic Council. And you can also go to our website, sunrisecounty.org, and sign up for our newsletters, where you stay posted on awesome stuff like this. So if with 5 minutes left to go, any other questions for our folks here? Going, gone. All right, thank you so very much for attending. As I said earlier, these will be recorded. Tuesdays was live. Tonight's was live and certainly different than Tuesdays. A lot of the same information, but definitely different questions and different conversations. They'll both be posted on the Sunrise County Economic Council website under Broadband, under the Broadband tab. And please do sign up and keep an eye out for super cool stuff coming up. I do want to thank Nathan Brimmer of Axiom Technologies and Lisa Hanscom of Rope Bluffs and Daniel Sullivan of Down East Broadband Utility and Chris Laughlin, who is Baileyville Town Manager and one of the original towns involved in the DBU. So with no further questions or anything, I'm going to wish everybody a wonderful night and a happy holidays.
Thank you very much for putting this on.
Thank you.